Welcome in, everybody, to America's Finest Sports. It's Wednesday night. My name's Makana. I also run TTB Ravens Media. My Twitter account is at the Big Makana. What I'm going to be doing tonight is I'm live on TikTok. I'm also live on the America's Finest Sports YouTube channel. Is I'm going to be talking about the NBA as a whole. Now, my goal with America's Finest Sports is just to be able to talk about all the NBA teams that don't get as much media coverage as a lot of the other things. So I may bring up players that you guys don't hear a lot about. I may bring up rookies. I may bring up teams. I may bring up, slept on superstars a little bit more than the national media. But overall, I want to talk basketball, and I want to talk real basketball. I don't want to talk about this fake nonsense that we see on all these other platforms. My goal on TikTok, on YouTube, is to be able to talk about the things that I feel like are relevant in the basketball world. Now, first off, is I'm going to be talking about Kevin Durant to the Celtics. Next off is I'm going to be talking about, the very surprising players from the NBA Summer League. Now, these are not the top picks. I will talk about the top picks in a later segment, but I'm going to be talking about the slept-on players that really balled out that I was impressed by from Summer League. Then I'll get into the top picks, overreactions from, guys like Chet Holmgren, Jabari Smith, Keegan Murray, those types of players, Jaden Ivey. All those guys, I'll be talking about them as well. But the main goal, talk about the guys that people don't hear about, then to talk about the guys that are at the top of everybody's mind. And then finally, I'll finish off talking about the LA Clippers because overall, I feel like Kawhi Leonard and that question of whether or not they will be able to really get into contention, because the last couple of seasons outside of last year, the Clippers were a really good team. They were a team that were competing for a championship. So when Kawhi comes back, is this a championship contender? Those are the topics I'm going to be running through tonight. I'm doing this all on my own, so hopefully I'm able to keep it going. So let's start off. Let's talk about Kevin Durant and potentially going to the Celtics. I'm also going to be talking about some other teams, some other rumors that I've been seeing, across Twitter, across the national media, and things like that. But I really wanted to talk about Kevin Durant to the Celtics first because I think it's downright ridiculous. I don't think it makes much sense for really either team, because when I'm looking at it, the overall trade, what it would have to be is, I think if the trade happens, the Nets need Jaylen Brown, which he's on a very cheap contract. Overall, it would be very difficult to happen. But they need Jaylen Brown. They'd probably get back Derek White, to help the contract money-wise work. Grant Williams. And I've seen 2 first-round picks, unprotected, and then also a pick swap going to the Brooklyn Nets. And when I see that, a trade like that being proposed and talking about sending a guy like Jaylen Brown, who was the number 2 guy on a championship contending team, not just contending, they were in the championship games. They were in the NBA Finals last season. So when I'm looking at those teams, what do they benefit from this? Because the Boston Celtics, obviously they get Kevin Durant, but they lose out on a key piece in Jaylen Brown, who is very cheap and has worked very well in this system, formerly under Brad Stevens. But he has worked very, very well. And I see Hacks in the comments says that he thinks Jaylen Brown was more important than Jason Tatum in the playoff run. And I'm going to say, Jason Tatum, yes, he's their superstar, but Jaylen Brown is not far behind him when it comes to talent, when it comes to production in the NBA. I think he's a very solid player. He's not as good defensively. But the other thing that I've seen out of this trade that a lot of people don't talk about is the Brooklyn Nets. They want Marcus Smart if they're going to make this deal. If the Brooklyn Nets want Marcus Smart, there is no way the Boston Celtics are trading Marcus Smart and Jaylen Brown in a deal. Because if you trade Marcus Smart in a deal for Kevin Durant, yes, you get Kevin Durant. Yes, you get a top 5 player in the NBA. Yes, you get a top 3, top 2, maybe top 1 scorer in the NBA. But at the same time, you're losing your best defender. And not just by a slight margin, this other guy will be able to play. No. If you trade away Marcus Smart, you're losing the clear defensive anchor on that team. Not to mention they're also getting rid of their secondary scorer. And in many games, their primary scorer. Because when Jason Tatum is off, they give the rock to Jaylen Brown and he starts finding his stroke. And then eventually they kind of bring Jason Tatum right back into that. But overall, Jaylen Brown, 1-2 punch right there. You look at the bad trades in NBA history, you look at the bad moves that have been made, it's been getting rid of primary assets, a part of an already cohesive unit, to try and bring in somebody new. This is why the Golden State Warriors trade wouldn't work out, right? You can bring in Kevin Durant to the Golden State Warriors. A lot of people say that they have the best potential package. You package Jordan Poole, Jonathan Kuminga, James Wiseman. The Nets are listening. They have to be listening. Yes, you can package all those players, but those are players. Like Jordan Poole, massive to that team. James Wiseman was the number 2 overall pick. He's set to be the future. They really believe in him. We saw him in Summer League. He was balling out. When the Nets are trying to make these trades, and they also don't view Jordan Poole as a number 1 option to win a championship, which I would agree with, why would they make a trade for a player that won't... Like, if you're going to make a trade with Kevin Durant, you need a player that you can build around as your number 1. That has to be the goal, right? And if you're looking at it from the Boston Celtics point of view, Kevin Durant, yes, you get him. But is it really worth it for them? I absolutely don't think so. I think Kevin Durant will be a locker room problem. I think he'll be a bigger... I don't think the Nets or the Celtics would be as good with Kevin Durant as they are with Jaylen Brown. Now, looking at the other trades, because there are other deals that KD could potentially end up going to. I think the next biggest behind the Celtics is the Phoenix Suns. That's a spot where Kevin Durant has talked about. That's a place that he would love to go. He wants to go play with Booker and Chris Paul. So that's the other thing, is Kevin Durant's like forcing us away to play with like certain players. So if they're like, well, if the Nets say, well, we need Devin Booker in this deal to get, Kevin Durant over there, KD's like, no, I don't want to go there. I want their main player. So the deal would probably look something like Miles Bridges, Jay Crowder, I don't know, maybe Cam Johnson, and I think like 4 unprotected firsts. Maximum amount of picks. Miles Bridges, who, he's not a build-around piece, but he's definitely a great piece to have if you're building around. This trade is centered around the draft picks. But like when I'm looking at it, like 4 unprotected firsts, right? It doesn't make sense for the Nets to trade for unprotected firsts unless they're other teams' firsts. Because if you give a Kevin Durant to a team, the first round pick, you're not getting, the number 2 overall pick. You are getting 4 years, because Kevin Durant's on his deal for, like 3 more seasons. You're getting at least 3 years of nothing. Like back-end first-round picks. That doesn't make any sense to do. And then you're having a guy like Miles Bridges, you're having a guy like Mikal Bridges, not Miles Bridges, I apologize. You're having a guy like that who's pretty solid. I think he's a young talent. If you're a championship contender, you would love to have Bridges because he can score the ball, he's very aggressive, and he can play great defense. Number 2 in the Defensive Player of the Year voting. But, he's not a superstar. He's not going to make or break your team, playoffs or not. So, like, that move doesn't make sense for the Nets. There is no move that makes sense for the Brooklyn Nets to make. The final move that I'm going to talk about, logistically in the team, would be the Miami Heat. The other thing about Miami Heat, like I brought up with the Boston Celtics and like I brought up with the Phoenix Suns, Kevin Durant's forcing his way to play with certain players. He has said that he wants to play with, I believe, Kyle Lowry. He wants to play with Jimmy Butler. He wants to play with Bam Adebayo. And I think Tyler Hero was the other guy that he said that he wanted to play with. But the main thing was like he wanted Lowry and he wanted to play with Hero. Well, okay. Okay, Kevin Durant. If you're going to go to the Heat, they have to give up assets. Tyler Hero is probably the best asset that they could trade to the Heat. Now you may be saying, why not Bam Adebayo? I would love Bam Adebayo in Brooklyn. But there's the entire fiasco behind the rookie designated deal. Because you can only have one player on a rookie designated deal in the NBA. The Brooklyn Nets have Ben Simmons. That means they can't trade for Andrew Wiggins. That means they can't trade for Bam Adebayo. This massively restricts what you can do as a team. This is why it was so difficult to get Ben Simmons out of the Philadelphia 76ers organization. Because a lot of teams just cannot get him. Because they already have a player on that designated rookie. So what are they going to do? They can't get the best asset that they could probably trade away in Bam Adebayo. So you got to get Tyler Hero, Duncan Robinson, and I think Kyle Lowry as well. The other thing is, you want those 2 unprotected first. But again, unprotected first-round picks. This is the Miami Heat. They were already a great team. You add Kevin Durant to them. I mean, this is like pick 28 and up. Like, they're already one of the best, regular season teams in looking at the record. They're like, that's not worthwhile. If you're the Brooklyn Nets and you're trading away Kevin Durant, who on your team automatically makes you a contender every year, Tyler Hero's not doing that. I like Tyler Hero. I'm a big fan of his game. But he's a 6th man right now. You have Duncan Robinson. Duncan Robinson's really good if you're trying to contend, right? A spot-up shooter. He's not turning a franchise around. Tyler Hero's not turning a team around. Kyle Lowry, very solid player. If you're a contending team, you may want a point guard like Kyle Lowry that's able to do the dirty work, get things done. That's something that we could possibly see. But again, the Nets wouldn't have anybody. So, in my honest opinion, I don't think Kevin Durant's getting traded this offseason, at least not to a team that he wants to go to. Because the Brooklyn Nets, they're in a situation that really sucks for them. Because a lot of times when guys like Kevin Durant want to get traded, right, those levels of superstars, it's the last year of their deal. So the teams that trade for them, they know, okay, we got to trade for him, then we got to try and re-sign him. We got to extend him, whatever it is. Kevin Durant's on that deal. It is very rare for a player, especially of Kevin Durant's caliber, top 5 player in the NBA, to get traded. Like, just that happening, to get traded, not forcing his way out, just to be traded. It doesn't happen because that is such a valuable contract. You're going to have him for the rest of his prime. So, the assets that the Nets are going to want are going to be astronomical, especially after the deal that happened between the Timberwolves and Jazz. And then if you're another team, like, you just can't give up those assets because they can't even take your designated rookies. Kevin Durant, unless the Brooklyn Nets are able to trade Ben Simmons first, which very difficult to find a trade for Ben Simmons, even though I'm a fan of Ben Simmons. I really like his game. I think he can be a very, very good piece on a contending team in the NBA. If you can't find a trade partner for him, you're not trading KD. Kyrie Irving's a different story. I think you could get rid of Kyrie, if you wanted to send him over to the Lakers and whatnot. Potentially. You could potentially get Kyrie out of there. But if you can't trade KD, why would you trade Kyrie? You have to try and keep them together. You have to do what the Green Bay Packers did and say, hey, why don't we play it out for this season, then we'll decide. That's what they did to Aaron Rodgers. He played it out. He said, you know what, it's not so bad. Let's get that extension. KD wants to leave because he's not winning. That's the reason why KD wants to leave. The reason why he's not winning is because they haven't really been healthy. Maybe they're healthy this year. I don't think KD ends up actually getting traded, especially not in the offseason, because it just doesn't make sense for Brooklyn to do it. And if Kevin Durant really says, I'm not going to play, I think it's more beneficial to the Brooklyn Nets to maybe just say, hey, you know what, we're not going to play. Yeah, that's fine. We're not going to trade you. Is Kevin Durant willing to sit out the rest of his contract, the rest of maybe his prime, the next 3 years? Is he willing to sit out for 3 years of the NBA? I don't think so. I don't think that's something he's willing to do. So basically, the Brooklyn Nets, I think, has the leverage in this situation because they can go out and say, you know what? It's fine. We're not going to trade you. You want to force your way into early retirement, you can do that. Or you can try and play and you can try and win a championship for us because we are trying to build a team around you. They brought in Ben Simmons. They brought in Kyrie Irving. Ben Simmons couldn't play last year. I really like that addition if he could play. If he can play this year, it could work out pretty darn well. Remember what happened in Golden State when they traded for D'Angelo Russell. They played it out for a little bit. They tested it out. They were like, you know what? It's not really working. Let's trade away D'Lo. Let's get ourselves Andrew Wiggins. Well, now we can see KD, and Ben Simmons and Kyrie. I think they tested out a little bit because they hold the leverage with Kevin Durant. They can force him into retirement if they want to. Yeah, KD can strong arm and be like, well, I'm not going to play. You won't win a championship. They can also say, yeah, but trading you away is worse for our future than having, them not playing. Yes, Houston owns a lot of their picks. But if they trade him away and they get the 29th pick in the draft 3 years in a row, like getting the 29th pick versus getting no first round pick is not much of a difference. It's really not. So I don't think KD gets traded because I think they'd rather force him into early retirement.